So the next character we'll talk about is Savarkar. He's a lot of in news. One section of the liberal elite thinks that Savarkar was a traitor. The right thinks that essentially he was the person who got us freedom. As always, truth lies somewhere in between. If you think about Savarkar as a person, he has definitely two stages in his life. He was a grey character, and the grey was also a bit strange because he had a very white face and that he had a very black face. And let's sort of talk about him. Uh, again, Savarkar started as a revolutionary in a true sense. He also was a visionary and he had this idea of forming, like, rather than something like just throwing a bomb here and there like Bhagat Singh did, he had a plan in mind. He had a plan that staying outside, he'll try to have an armed insurrection and things like that. So, very sorted person from that perspective. And the kind of things he did, was he able to achieve much? Somewhat. He had many revolutionaries under him, and he was sort of guiding figure for them. British also understood that he's a very dangerous guy, so they imprisoned him in Sazai Kala Pani. And if you think about all the other people, of course, people were murdered or killed. The next level would be go to Savarkar. So of course he was not hanged till death and something like that. But you think about it, the next worst thing was getting imprisoned in Andaman Nicobar, which was a really bad thing. So from that perspective, we can't, like, what the amount of suffering Savarkar had, very few people had. Uh, but did he achieve a lot as a freedom fighter? Probably not. So suppose Gandhi was not. So just think about marginal in sort of significance of Savarkar. So suppose there was no other freedom fighter and Savarkar was just trying to wage his war. Was he able to achieve anything? Not much. Insignificant, I would try to say. Did it affect a lot? Again, not much. I would say Bhagat Singh, especially when he was under the hunger strike, was able to have a huge influence on the masses. Savarkar lacked that piece. What Savarkar had was a vision and the institutional framework. So he had an institution which sort of kept on, creeped on, and of course the sacrifice he made, especially in the jail, and the kind of torture which Britishers did. Now, if he was, as many people say, that he was a British stooge, then why would Britishers would have kept him? So he kept giving mercy protection, and I don't see much of a problem as many people say. Why? Because ultimately, what he's going to achieve out is sitting in jail. He has to go outside in case he wants to work for our freedom. We have the example of Shivaji, which I think says that by hook or by crook, you need to fight your war. So I don't see issue with mercy petition at say. The issue is in the second phase, that what did he do once he came back? Now, there are few charges. So as I said, one charge which is put on him is that he wrote a mercy petition. That's fine. I don't think writing a mercy petition, like probably a Gandhi would be, or a Nehru or a Bhagat Singh, or like everyone has his own sort of value thing. But trying to fight a war and just trying to fool the enemy is not something which I find a big issue with. Okay, so then what is my issue with Savarkar? So the issue I have with Savarkar are three. And the first issue is this, that when he got freedom, what did he do? And that's sort of my area of concern, that he didn't sort of at all come into the mainstream freedom movement. He focused a lot on the social side, which is very important for freedom as well. So the work he did for untouchables and making the temple and things like that, so is very remarkable. But for the political freedom perspective, his contribution became almost zero. So, which is also something we can, in general, be a bit compassionate of. Even Gandhi, after non-cooperation movement, spent 10 years, and as I have seen, that freedom is not just political; it is social, legal, cultural, and economic. And social is a very key aspect where Savarkar I would rate very highly, probably just less than Ambedkar. The point is that he just forgot about the political aspect. Now, as I said, you can still ignore it. You can always, so it's not a negative, it is a zero. The next thing which happens is that when the World War breaks, he almost becomes proponent of British Raj. Now he has this famous call even in 1940s that we should all go into the World War and get us enlisted into the army and things like that, which is again which is a slightly different thing than the previous thing. So you not working for political freedom and working for social freedom is fine, but you working against the political freedom and in favor of your oppressor is a problem. Now what people say is this, that he was just trying to make sure that we all get into the army and we learn about the military so that then we can come back and then just fight a war. But where's the proof of that? If that was the intention, then probably at some point of time Savarkar and his followers would have waged a war against the British state, but they never did. They never did when India was being partitioned. If you had so much of armed people who were doing that, why can't he could have said Nathuram Godse and just shoot Mountbatten? Like गांधी जी तो मारने का मतलब ही क्या था ना यार, आप माउंटबैटन को मार देते, खत्म, कहाँ पार्टीशन ही नहीं होता, जिन्ना को मार देते। अरे आप जिन्ना को मार सकते थे, आपने मारा नहीं। आप माउंटबैटन को मार सकते थे, आप कितने लोगों को मार सकते थे, पर आपने किसको मारा? जो आपका या हमारे देश के ही नेता थे। तो दैट इज माई प्रॉब्लम। अगर जिन्ना नहीं होता तो पाकिस्तान भी नहीं बनता ना, माउंटबैटन नहीं होता तो पाकिस्तान भी नहीं बनता। सो दैट इज अ प्रॉब्लम विच आई सी with Savarkar actively colluding with Britishers, and whatever explanations his supporters give, they don't sort of travel because ultimately, if the militarization of society was an objective, he never did anything on that, even when India was being partitioned. The third aspect is the most troublesome, which actually many people ignore. And the third aspect is the role he played in the partition of India. Now, I'm nowhere trying to again criticize him. Like, of course, there are people who are on radical Hindu, people on radical left, and the story in general is this, that Savarkar said that Hindus and Muslims are incompatible, and we should probably fight. And if that is a story, I think I'm still fine with that. I may not agree with that story. I don't think Hindu and Muslims are two nations, but at least that's something which at least is not a very bad thing. The bad thing is, and which not many people know, that Savarkar and Jinnah had an alliance, and he had an alliance. He had a political alliance which was not something which like a Owaisi and Amit Shah aligning and just trying to help each other. It was actual alliance, which means, so as many of you may know or not know, that Muslim League was not ruling most of what we call as Pakistan. So Sindh, Punjab, NWFP, Baluchistan. So these provinces either were voting for Congress or they were voting for a union party in Punjab and things like that. Now, Britishers didn't like Congress, of course, and what they wanted is to install non-Congress governments. So how they could do that? They could do that if all the non-Congress opposition unites together. So ultimately, Savarkar's Hindu Samajsabha and Muslim League formed a coalition government, and it's that coalition government which worked for the partition of India. So now they would say that we wanted to be in the government simply because अगर हम गवर्नमेंट के बाहर रहेंगे तो हम चीज़ों को हो नहीं पाएंगे, हम चीज़ों को संभाल नहीं पाएंगे। अरे संभाला क्या आपने? जब हिंदू मर रहे थे तो वेयर वाज सावरकर, वेयर वाज नाथूराम गोडसे। अरे जिस गवर्नमेंट को मुस्लिम तो सत्ता में आती ही नहीं। अरे जितने जो लाहौर में लोग मरे हैं, कराची में लोग मरे, वो तो मरते ही नहीं ना अगर वो गवर्नमेंट वहाँ इंस्टॉल नहीं होती। उस गवर्नमेंट को इंस्टॉल किसने किया? हिंदू महासभा अपने सपोर्ट से। जब पाकिस्तान के पार्टीशन का प्रस्ताव पारित हुआ तो मानता हूँ साहब महासभा उससे अलग रही, बट उन्होंने गवर्नमेंट से अपना नाम वापस भी नहीं ले लिया आपने। जब जिन्ना लोगों को मार रहा था, जब 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 देवर फुल राइट्स हैपनिंग, माई पॉइंट इज दैट these could have very easily been avoided if Savarkar would not have brought Muslim League at the first place, and he had no remorse to that, and his supporters don't have any explanation to that except saying that हम तो चाह रहे थे कि हम सत्ता में रहे। सत्ता में तो रहना चाहते हैं हर कोई, पर आपको आपका एक ज़मीर तो है ना। जो लोग मरे हैं, जो लोग डिस्प्लेस हुए हैं, we celebrate 14th August as partition whatever remembrance day. Some blame goes to those people like Savarkar and Ambedkar who were trying to propagate partition, and if it was anti-Muslim League, I'm fine with that, but then they were also having a political alliance with Muslim League. That is something which hurts. So as I said, first point we can still ignore, second point is something which is bad, the third point is which is worse. Now, when we evaluate a historical figure, we have to take everything into picture. And if I try to look into from the political perspective, you can't just ignore Savarkar's positive role in the first phase. You can't ignore the kind of atrocities Britishers committed to him, and we should also not be brutal against him just for having a reputation. But in totality, if we see, there's a lot to be answered by Savarkar. If you think about other dimensions like economic, he didn't have much of an economic plan. Whatever it is, it was more again a bit left kind of an economic plan, having a very big state, having planning commissions, uh, having industrialization and heavy industrialization, which is again one Soviet model. If you think about cultural, he had a very huge role, no doubt about it. I think we should give all credit to Savarkar that he did try to consolidate that the Hindus under the Hindutva thing. You may dislike it, but it had a lot of positive thing. It was Islamophobic. That is one thing which I may or may not disagree. My disagreement basically is this, that on paper he was Islamophobic, but then he was having the alliance with exactly those people. That is the deal breaker for me. So if you ask me, simple question, that was Savarkar behind India's freedom? Firstly, in the positive side of his life, he made huge contribution, but did they bring impact? They had very marginal impact. But if you see the second part, the way he propped up had alliance with Muslim League and tried to have them in the government, that is the very risky part. If they are villains of the partition, they have to be people like Jinnah, Ambedkar and Savarkar. No doubt about that. Of course, Mahatma Gandhi also has to take the blame. Nehru has to take, and Patel has to take even a bigger blame than Gandhi. But there's a difference between act of omission and act of commission. So in totality, it looks a bit, it would be like, let's put things in perspective, Savarkar being responsible for our social freedom, probably yes. Cultural freedom, again, he should get some credit. Political, he did some good work, but what bad thing he did in the last decade of like 40s is really horrible. And we're paying the price even till now, that a great motherland has been divided, and people who divided the country should not be probably, I shouldn't say they should not be, they should be. Of course we have to take, like हम रावण का भी अच्छा पार्ट को हम पूजा करते हैं, तो I pray for Savarkar, but then please, we need to take the full thing into context, and we have to ask those difficult questions from him, as we should ask from all the freedom fighters.